special greeting to the people who are watching live on the web, both on the New America Foundation website and the Washington Note blog I have. We have a nice, intimate group this morning, but I've been told we've got about 100 people lined up on the web right now as well, so we've got a community outside. On very short notice, we were given the opportunity and the privilege to spend some time with Adnan Pachachi, who many people know as the former foreign minister of Iraq, last in 1968. But what is much more interesting is what he has been doing in recent days. I mentioned I saw Arno de Borschgraf, an old friend of his here, and he says, yes, he's worried about those old friends because it belies his age, but not his vigor in terms of what Minister Pachachi is doing in Iraq. Let me read a brief biographical sketch of Minister Pachachi. He's the son of a Sunni Arab family with a long tradition in Iraqi politics, a graduate of Victoria College, Alexandria in Egypt. He was Iraq's permanent representative to the United Nations in 1959 to 1965, and then again in 67 to 68, and then served as foreign minister of Iraq from 1965 and 67. He spent most of the years of Ba'athist rule in exile in Abu Dhabi. After leaving Iraq in 1971, while in the UAE, he acted as advisor to the Emir and even he acted as an advisor to the Emir. In June 1, 2004, fast forwarding to the present, he was reportedly nominated to be the next president of Iraq. He seems, however, to lack, he did not, however, take that post. A liberal secularist and now head of the Iraq Independence Democratic Party, a force for liberal secularism inside Iraq. He is now a member of the Iraqi parliament, chairs the drafting committee at the time of the interim constitution in 2004, and is continuing to be a force for governance reform and change inside Iraq. I want to thank Stuart Schwartzstein, who helped line up today's meeting, and I look forward to a very active discussion. And what, in part, some of the things that I've asked Minister Pachachi to talk on is really the state of governance inside Iraq today, and to what degree the tensions that we see reported every day here between contending groups on the Sunni and Shia side, camps within the Shia dimensions, how the nationalist movements that are religiously affiliated are squaring. And I'm most interested in Pachachi's work as a liberal secularist amidst all these other factions. It's, I think, an underreported aspect of the battle over the future of Iraq. And in particular, I'm interested as well in the state of the American presence. We have people like Nir Rosen and others who have reported to Iraq that in Nir's perspective, America is less and less an issue in the evolving dynamics in the region. There is a status of forces agreement that is under negotiation right now, which is quite controversial in this country, but I think also quite controversial in Iraq. So all of this is open, and I look forward to Minister Pachachi's thoughts on these issues, and then we'll have an active discussion session with him. So please welcome Adnan Pachachi, and thank you very much for coming to the New America Foundation.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to address this gathering on issues that are of interest for me and for yourselves. I just came back from Baghdad a little over a week ago. The situation has improved to some extent in certain areas of the country, thanks partly to the surge, but mainly, I would think, because of the what we call the Sahwa or awakening groups who decided to bear arms against some of the terrorist organizations. But still, the situation overall in the country is somewhat precarious, and there is always fear that violence would erupt again, because mainly these armed groups still retain their weapons, and their infrastructure remains intact. So it's, the situation is better, of course, but still has not improved sufficiently to assure people that there be peace and tranquility in the future. In Mosul, for example, there was certainly a great improvement, and the people of Mosul are extremely happy and satisfied with what has happened. But there is a lot of fear still. So this is the situation. On the whole, the people of Iraq are still concerned and fearful that violence can erupt at any moment. But of course, they hope that the forthcoming elections, the elections this year will be for the provincial councils, and then elections at the end of next year for a new parliament. We are concentrating all our efforts on these elections because we realize that change in Iraq can only come through parliamentary and democratic means. I think the days of coup d'etats and placing strong men at the head of government are gone. For one thing, there's no one able to do it, perhaps except the United States, but I don't think the United States is going to do something like that. So we have no other means except parliamentary elections, and we are trying our best to present to the Iraqi people a third alternative. Because what we have had so far were predominantly religious parties, which depend on their particular sectarian base, and the sort of the centrist movement was not able really to compete with these parties, partly, I mean, the last elections, I mean, partly because there was a lot of fraud and intimidation and interference. But I think after 3 years of government by sectarian religious parties, there is now a backlash and a great deal of frustration and anger that the government really has not delivered, that the government still lags behind in providing essential services to the people, and also that the security situation, as I said, is still very, very uncertain and precarious. So the elections, we hope at the end of this year for the provinces will, I think, give an indication of the mood of the country. And for that reason, we are concentrating all our efforts to provide a list of candidates drawn from all sections of Iraqi society. So we have in our so-called front, political front, we have Sunnis, Shias, Christians, Muslims, Kurds, Arabs, Turkomans, quite a large number of women too. And we offer this list as an alternative to the religious parties that have governed the country the last 3 years. But of course, we have problems there, because the electoral law which has been presented to Parliament makes two important prohibitions. It prohibits religious symbols to be used for electoral purposes, and also it prohibits the use of places of religious worship, like mosques or Husseinias or churches, whatever, to be used for electoral purposes also. But now there is an attempt by some members of Parliament, especially from the sectarian parties, to lift these prohibitions. And that's a very serious matter. We also feel that the elections, if they're going to be free and an accurate reflection of the mood and the aspirations and yearnings of the people of Iraq, they should be properly conducted with international supervision. And more important than that, there must be a neutral force to oversee the whole electoral process. and to prevent intimidation and interference and fraud. Unfortunately, there is not much faith in the police and the security services at present, because they have been heavily infiltrated by the militias and some of the sectarian parties. But to a lesser extent also the army has been, it's more reliable, but still people are concerned that there are still some elements in the army who of course have divided loyalties. We want, of course, eventually to have a security service and armed services who owe allegiance only to the state of Iraq and who don't have divided loyalties, that they should be faithful servants of the state and will not be influenced by their sectarian affiliations or religious beliefs or party loyalties, for that matter, too. So we have to find a way that if these forces are going to be used, then they have to be used under the strict supervision and control of the multinational forces. Because in Iraq, people have more trust in the multinational forces than they do in the national police and army. This is something, of course, the United States government will have to decide on regarding because it may require possibly additional forces or at least perhaps forces from other countries would be invited to come and work closely with the Americans and the Iraqi forces to ensure that the elections are free and honest. This is really the main thing that we are concerned with the next few months until the end of next year. What we are trying to do is really to separate religion from politics in Iraq. We believe that the Iraqi people are essentially secular in outlook, and therefore we have to give them a chance to, without fear, to express their preference. And we feel reasonably optimistic that if the elections are going to be fair and without any fraud or interference, then I think the secular forces, the secular parties, will make a very good showing. I don't know whether they'll get a majority, but certainly they'll make a good showing that governance without their participation would be very difficult for the other parties. Regarding our relations with the United States, of course, as you know, negotiations are going on at present for what they call what is called a status of forces agreement. There are, of course, conflicting views but I must tell you that there is a great deal of opposition for a long-term relationship, but there is a great deal of acceptance for a short-term relationship. In other words, the people of Iraq, the majority of the people, feel that the presence of the multinational forces in Iraq in the near or intermediate future is absolutely necessary. Because if there is an abrupt and precipitate withdrawal of troops, we fear that the country will be plunged into chaos and anarchy. But of course, that does not mean that these troops will stay for a very long time. I believe the main thing that the multinational forces should concentrate their attention on is to help in recreating or reorganizing on professional lines the security services and the armed forces of Iraq, so that in the shortest possible time, we may be able to have a force that is reliable and with its loyalty completely to the state. And then and only then, we can think of a large-scale withdrawal of American troops from Iraq. But then, of course, there is a question of what kind of future relationship Iraq is going to have with the United States. Well, of course, Iraq, having common frontiers with two large states, which at one time or another in history have governed Iraq, and who have certain territorial ambitions in the country. I mean Iran and Turkey. I think Iraq needs an ally that will protect it against any possible aggressive designs or aggressive moves by those two neighbors. And we have problems. I mean, we have problems with Iran regarding their persistent attempts to interfere in internal politics and to spread their influence across the country, using some of the religious parties for that purpose. Of course, we have problems with Turkey because Turkey is against any large degree of autonomy or independence for the Kurdish areas in the north. Also, they control the waters of both the Tigris and the Euphrates, and we have had some problems there. So we try to have good relations with our two neighbors, large neighbors, but of course we have to be very careful, and we have to be watchful and see whether these relations can be fruitful or not. Therefore, in the long term, I think the United States and Iraq could have a relationship similar to that between the United States and the Gulf states. In other words, they'll have absolutely no role internally, but their main role would be to provide protection and assistance in case of external aggression or interference. And this is probably the question that will have to be negotiated. I don't believe that an agreement can be reached before the end of this year, because there will be opposition in the Iraqi parliament, and I imagine there will be probably opposition in this country too, because many feel that such an agreement should not be pushed through quickly, but wait until a new administration takes office next January. And so it's quite possible that the Security Council will be asked, of the United Nations, will be asked to adopt a new resolution extending the mandate of the multinational forces for another 6 months or 1 year. So that will give an opportunity and time for the new administration in Washington, and hopefully for a new government in Iraq to consider this rather important issue, which of course will have great consequences for Iraq and for the entire area. Unfortunately, the government has not been functioning properly, mainly because the selection of ministers and senior officials has been not based, the criteria was not that of competence or integrity or experience, but rather loyalty, party loyalty or sectarian affiliation, with the result that many ministries became like private fiefdoms for various parties, with disastrous consequences for the administration and for the provision of essential services to the people of Iraq. What we want to do is that in the future, ministers and senior officials will be appointed solely on basis of merit, of experience, of competence, of integrity. I must tell you also, unfortunately, that corruption is pervasive and prevalent, and because of this division of spoils, the spoils system that is being practiced in Iraq, as I have said often, is one of the worst in the world. All these things have to be really dealt with very effectively if and when a new government takes power in Iraq. And this is our program. Our platform really, first of all, of course, it wants to preserve the unity and territorial integrity of Iraq. Secondly, to reorganize the armed forces so that these forces will not have divided loyalties. We have a national reconciliation, by which we mean all Iraqis, except those who are implicated in serious crimes, will be allowed to take part in the economic, political, and social life of the country. And of course, very important is to restore the integrity and the impartiality and efficiency of the judicial system, which unfortunately at present is very much under the influence of the executive of the government. All these things have to be done. It's not an easy task, but I have faith, and I'm optimistic that things will improve eventually in Iraq, because the Iraqi people have gone through terrible experiences, and I think they are determined now to have another chance. And I believe that the Iraqi people have shown great resiliency in the past, and I think they will continue to do that. And I feel that with patience and hard work, we may be able to have a secure, secular, prosperous Iraq, which will be of great benefit to the entire region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Do we have time for questions? Excellent. I'm going to open the questions. I've taken off my jacket because I am a bit hot. Feel free to as well. And I want to tell our viewers on the web, of which I know there are many right now, that my name is Steve Clemens. I direct the American Strategy Program here at the New America Foundation. And they see you, but they don't see us. The camera is fixed. So when I bring the microphone over to you, if you could identify yourself when you make your comment or question, that would be nice for the folks watching on the internet. But let me pose a question right now. I think that your vision of a stable, prosperous, secular Iraq is something that nearly everyone I know would just love to see. And the problem comes when you then begin to sort of look at a realistic assessment of what's happening not only within Iraq but among its neighbors who have no such trust in the ability to generate this outcome. And I'm interested in some sort of maybe some harder-edged realities that, for instance, Zbigniew Brzezinski has for quite a long time said that the only way to engineer the sort of meeting of the minds of the major nodes of power inside Iraq, and also to focus the minds and attention of stakeholders from Saudi Arabia to Iran to Turkey and others in the region, is to use the lever of withdrawal as a way to engineer those meetings and discussions. And as long as that doesn't happen, in a sense, the American presence creates a buffer for against responsible action by these other parties, and doesn't fundamentally change the dynamic. And I want to note that Brzezinski's comments are not the typical binary idiocy of stay or leave. It's the question of how do you actually engineer the dynamics to get something moved further along the lines you have. And I'm interested in what you think about those comments, and whether you'd like to add anything to your discussion of how you look at Iran's role inside Iraq, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. To many of us, this looks like an simmering proxy war of interests where the Iraqis matter less and less, actually. And I'm wondering how accurate that is.
Well, let me put it this way. The main thing in Iraq at present is to have a security forces and armed forces that are able to maintain law and order on their own without the assistance of the multinational forces. As long as Iraq is unable to do that, it will need the presence of the multinational forces. The idea that a threat of withdrawal is going to improve things, I think is somewhat naive, if I may say so. And I think it would be a disaster if you take this chance. And if there is a quick withdrawal, what will happen, not civil war, but what we're going to have, if that happens, is there will be warlords controlling specific areas of the country, fighting against each other for control of resources, for consolidating their power. It is not going to be a war between Shias and Sunnis. On the contrary, what has been happening is that there has been fighting among the Shias and among the Sunnis. So very rarely, and I want to emphasize this point, very rarely were Shia militias fighting against Sunni militias. It rarely happens. What happens is that these militias go and kill people, abduct people. So they really, the people were the main victims. But among the Shias and among the Sunnis, there has been bitter fighting. For example, among the Shias, you have the Badr brigade against the Sadris. And then you have other factions. You have Hizb al-Fadila, there's the Dawah party, we even have a Hezbollah in Iraq, by the way. And also Tharallah, and there are various splinter groups who fight against each other, all Shias. Among the Sunnis, of course, you have the fighting which is going on between the Qaeda and the awakening groups, the Sahwa. And of course, between the Sahwa and the Islamic party, which is a Sunni party, which is actually an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. So this is the fear that without a strong presence of, well, hopefully of an Iraqi force in the future, but until that happens, multinational force, the country will disintegrate and into warlords and fiefdoms really fighting against each other. And so we have to guard against that. And that's why my point is that the top priority should be given to reorganizing a reliable, efficient Iraqi force to maintain law and order, a force that does not have divided loyalties, a force that owes allegiance to the state and only to the state of Iraq.
Thank you. Let me open the floor. Arno de Borgra.
Arno de Borgra, CSIS. Minister, I'm told that there are no Arab ambassadors at all in Baghdad today, and you travel around the Arab world. What do they give you as the reason for not sending ambassadors to Baghdad?
Well, the real reason, really, is that they don't have much trust and faith in the government. The government is perceived in many Arab countries as very closely connected with Iran. For the very simple reason is that it's actually, this government is sustained and supported, and it stays in power because of the support of the Supreme Council, Islamic Council, which of course has very close relations with Iran. And they, in Arab Isle, or in many countries in the Arab world, they think this is really just a pro-Iranian party, and therefore supporting the government or sending representatives to this government is really encouraging, in an indirect way, the influence of Iran in Iraqi.
Do you share their view?
Well, I think I've spoken to Mr. Maliki myself. I said, look, you personally are, people sort of have trust in you, or they accept you. But you have to really distance yourself from these parties that are obviously influenced, if not controlled by outside powers, especially Iran. And because he was complaining about some of the ministers, they are not doing their job properly and all that. And I said, well, why don't you decide to reform your cabinet? You choose your minister directly, and you come to Parliament and ask for their approval. And then I think the sectarian parties that have been supporting you will find it difficult to reject your appointments, because they would be supported by public opinion and by the public in general.
That hasn't happened yet.
No.
Minister, thank you very much. I'm Nazar Janabi with the Washington Institute. I have a couple of quick questions. First one, since you're talking about Iran, and Maliki is scheduled to be in Iran probably next week.
Yes.
Advising him, what would you recommend that he would talk to Ahmadinejad and ask from him? This was question one. And question two, you mentioned that the armed groups' infrastructure is still intact. I wonder if you meant like their physical infrastructure, because we've seen a spike in the weapon caches found and destroyed, or is it the ideological infrastructure that still maintains its presence? Thank you very much.
As far as the visit of Mr. Maliki to Iran, if I was going to give him any advice, the first thing you should tell Ahmadinejad is stop interfering in Iraqi affairs, and stop providing weapons to, because otherwise we will have to hit these people, especially those who are close to you. I mean the Badr. That's if Maliki is prepared to say things like that. I mean, that would be my advice to him. Regarding the infrastructure, well, I mean, it's all. Infrastructure mainly is the weapons, although some weapons have been discovered, but there are still a lot of weapons, and Iran keeps on sending these weapons. You know, this is the problem. These weapons are replenished there, and also they have the organization, they have the power, the command structure. It's all there. It hasn't been affected yet.
Where does Muqtada al-Sadr fit into your picture of this, given his very clear
Well, Muqtada
nationalism?
al-Sadr has, no doubt, he has a popular following, especially among the poorer and the underprivileged sections of Iraqi society. And he, of course, he says he's against federalism, which means he's against the division of Iraq along sectarian lines. He's, of course, he says that he wants the Americans to get out of Iraq as soon as possible. This makes him popular in certain sections, and of course...
Those don't sound that different than your position, although you're different on the timing of forces. But my question is,
Yeah.
Muqtada al-Sadr has been, I would say, demonized somewhat in the press here. I'm interested in whether that is deserved or not, given the fact that he seems to be a nationalist, seems to be at odds. I mean, I think what's odd about the U.S. position today is that we are somewhat assisting the fellow that Iran also supports. And al-Sadr seems to be a thorn in that side. And from inside the system, does that look like a fair assessment to you?
Well, it's true that they are supporting the main party that is close to Iran. Because, I mean, although Sadr has relations with Iran, and the Iranians have supported him in weapons and money and so on, but the main support of Iran comes from the Badr and the Supreme Islamic Council. And that's why there has been a... You see, Iran supports all these groups, and Iran doesn't mind if they fight against each other, because that means they'll be needing Iranian assistance and support even more. You know, it's there's nothing original about it. Has been done in other countries by other. So, but you see, the Sadris also have committed a lot of crimes, and they are perceived in certain, especially among some of the Sunni inhabitants of Baghdad, being responsible for the sectarian killings and for the abductions and of course a lot of the people who are in the Mahdi army were in the army of Saddam. They call him the Fidayin Saddam, and some of them are just criminals, you know, and unemployed people, and it's a hodgepodge, really. It's not a well-organized force, but that's why you have several factions in that force, and sometimes they do things at cross purposes. They do not act as one cohesive movement.
Interesting. Yes, sir. If you'll identify yourself.
Yes. Patrick Barry, National Security Network. I actually have a related question, and I was sort of wondering if you could give an assessment of the strength of Sadr's political movement and whether they can be expected to do well in the provincial elections late this year. Thank you.
I think they'll probably do well in the sense that they had boycotted the elections last time. And so I think they'll have some seats which they'll be able to win some seats in certain areas. I mean, and some of the Sadris actually have joined us in this sort of liberal front, if you like to call it, that we are establishing at present. And but they certainly will win some seats, especially in the south.
Let's go in the back here.
Thank you. Keith Henderson, American University. I'm wondering what your take on the corruption issue is with respect to the oil fund in Iraq. You know, Iraq's future, as you know, is tied to oil.
Yes.
And all the activities that you've mentioned are dependent on oil income and
Yes.
The budget being funded from these oil reserves. So I guess my question is, how much do you think has already been stolen from the oil fund, and how do you protect those resources so that you can undertake the agenda you've outlined?
Well, you know, there has been large-scale, if not stealing, but really some oil was smuggled out of Iraq without, we don't have a proper control about how much oil is produced, how much oil is exported, and some of the oil products. I mean, Iraq still imports oil products, although it has the crude oil, but the refineries are still understaffed. They need a lot of reparations and work. But the problem of the oil is we have to modernize the oil industry in Iraq. It has been neglected under the previous regime. And of course it will cost a great deal of money to really reorganize it and modernize it in a way that will allow Iraq to produce maybe between 7 or 8 million barrels a day. And now it's producing 2 million or sometimes less than 2 million. But of course, a lot will depend on having a government that, I wouldn't say completely incorruptible, but there is no such thing in the world, I think. You find corruption everywhere. But a government where corruption is kept at a minimum, or at least at reasonable levels. Unfortunately, at present, the corruption is going wild, really. I mean, it's so pervasive, it's so widespread, and something has to be done in this. You know, I mean, if you want to describe the present government of Iraq, and I'm not blaming Maliki for that. It is corrupt and incompetent.
Keith Henderson is
a deadly combination.
Keith Henderson is one of the town's big corruption watchers, and I keep thinking I want to do a conference someday on corruption, and I haven't had the time, because I guess I have a slightly different view. Keith will hit me later, but to some degree, when you look back at other economies that were in trouble, say Japan after World War II, flattened, you certainly had bureaucratic infrastructure and whatnot to work there. But there's just no way that you can look at Japan after the war and up to the Korean War without looking at it as a massively corrupt political economy that nonetheless produced state-directed efforts that over time generated egalitarian distributions of wealth. So when I hear corruption, I often wonder, you know, can corruption be your friend? If you don't have a market that's working, why can't you in fact use self-interested players in the absence of markets in an economy more effectively to move resources and attentions in a different direction? And when I compare, say, the corruption of the Philippines and Vietnam, which was profound and under American stewardship at that time, the problem, in my view, was the capital leaving the country, as opposed to Japan and some other Southeast Asian nations where the walls to capital flight were huge. So while I'm not necessarily pro-corruption, I sometimes think that we overstate what's going on when, in fact, you can move people's influence. The question is, can you not embarrass those players inside Iraq and raise the legal walls to capital flight in some ways to keep the chips at home, if you will? I mean, I know that's a much longer discussion, but I think that, you know, the bubble of corruption discussion needs more explication, and we'll invite Keith sometime to do that.
May I say one thing?
Certainly.
I think the Japanese example is the exception that proves the rule.
Yeah, maybe. Yes, right here, and I'll move on.
And as far as embarrassing people, don't count on it.
Okay.
Minister,
If you can identify yourself for the
absolutely.
internet.
My name is Ahmed Ali, and I'm with the Washington Institute. It's a pleasure hearing you speak, Minister. Being from Iraq, I know your history and I know what you have accomplished for the country. Speaking of the Sadrist and the provincial elections that are coming up, what the Sadrists have is, or what they have put for the leadership, is young people from Iraq or who were in Iraq when Saddam was there. And despite the fact that they are counterproductive and often destructive, but by their followers they're seen as an improvement or as real representatives. With the elections coming up, and I'm wondering if your list, your front, or your party is thinking of also recruiting some of the young and young Iraqi potential that could be perceived as of the people and also as a preparation for the next Iraqi generation.
Well, we have, in fact, we have. And as I said, there are people who belong to the Sadris movement who have joined us. So we have some Sadris. It's really we have some Sadris, we have some moderate religious figures, we have a lot of tribal leaders who are disenchanted with the government, and especially in the agricultural areas. Agriculture really has been neglected, and agricultural production has gone down considerably. So there's a lot of discontent among the tribal areas, which are mainly agricultural. So we have some of these, and of course we are supported by the civil society organizations because they feel that we actually provide the best kind of governance for Iraq in the future. I hope we won't disappoint them. We'll see what we can do.
I'm going here. Yes, sir.
Adil Shamu, Institute for Policy Studies. You talked diplomatically about multinational forces. They're really the U.S. forces. There's about 350,000 U.S. troops and contractors. That's a huge presence in any country, especially Iraq of
Yes.
27 million people. What you did not address is you took it as a given that there is a long-range influence, U.S. influence, whether it's by the power, force, or whatever, and how that is going to inflame the nationalistic. And you mentioned a little bit about al-Sadr. How is that continue to inflame nationalist feeling against the foreign occupiers, if you want to call them that way, or diminish the influence of your secular organization because you are not at the cutting edge and the forefront of nationalistic leadership?
But I would add that even King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia referred to the presence as an illegal occupation, just along the lines you
Well,
said, because of the concerns of legitimacy, his own legitimacy.
One thing is very clear, that the majority of Iraqis don't want to have foreign troops in the country. Obviously, we want to see these troops leave Iraq as soon as possible. But we think that they should leave at the right time. If they leave too soon, without adequate preparation for a force to take their place in the maintenance of law and order, as I said, the results will be disastrous. So it's not a question of wanting the Americans to stay. No, we want them to go, but to go at the right time, but not to go now, which would really, unfortunately, would plunge the country into chaos if there is an immediate withdrawal.
But my question is, why not your secular organization
Yeah.
take a leadership role in calling for U.S. troop withdrawal as a part of your #1 in your program, which will make you more popular and more supported by the Iraqi people?
Well, we say that. We say that these troops have to withdraw eventually. We say that. We say that, but...
I see a bumper sticker you could have called "At the Right Time."
Yeah, I know.
Yes. We're going back and then up
It's
to
very
Arno.
easy to ask for withdrawal right away, you know, and then people will applaud you. But that's nonsense, really.
My name is Mohammed Saleh from Interpress Service News Agency. I have two questions. One is regarding the strategic agreement which currently the Iraqi and U.S. governments are negotiating over. I wanted to know that what sort of relationships does your party want as far as security and defense areas are concerned in the future between Iraq and the U.S.? And my second question is about Kirkuk. Yesterday, the Kurdish Prime Minister said that Kurds are ready for a power-sharing agreement in Kirkuk. And I wonder if that can be taken as an indication that a final deal is eventually imminent on the status of Kirkuk.
Yes. Well, let me take the last question first, if I may. It's true that there has been some proposals of what you call power sharing. 32% of the seats in the Kirkuk Provincial Council would be given to the Kurds, 32% to the Arabs, and 32% to the Turkomans, and 4% to the Christian communities there. And if the Kurds are going to accept that, then I think the Kirkuk problem would have been resolved. Regarding the first question, which was
SOFA, the Status of Forces Agreement.
yes, the Status of Forces Agreement. You know, there are certain points which have to be clarified. For example, if an American soldier commits a crime, will he be subject to Iraqi law or to American law? If not the soldiers, how about the security guards that work with the army? Would they be subject to Iraqi law? Does Iraqi jurisdiction cover? These are the points. And then, of course, undertaking military operations, should that be done after consultation with the Iraqi authorities, or should the Americans have the right, if they see fit, to undertake such operations without prior consultation? These are points which are being discussed. And of course, there is the, as I said, the long-term issue of what kind of relationships should the United States have with Iraq. And there, of course, we believe that the United States' main task should be to help Iraq protect itself against external aggression and leave it to the Iraqis to deal with internal matters after we have reorganized our forces and they are adequate and reliable and people perceive them as such. Then we don't need any American help to maintain law and order.
I'd like to take you back to Iran. Maliki's trip to Iran, I think, will be his third trip. He came back from one of those trips with $1 billion of aid from Iran for schools and hospitals. Iran seems to have legitimate security concerns if you look at it from Iran's standpoint, whether you're a general or a mullah or a Democrat. Shouldn't we be sitting back down with them at the highest level to discuss this?
We meaning the United States.
Yes, the United States and Iran, given the fact that the Lee Hamilton, Jim Baker report of 2 Novembers ago
of course.
said that Iran is the dominant influence today in Iraq, not the United States.
Thank you all. That's Arno de Borschgraaf.
Yes, of course. That's absolutely. We do not oppose talks between Iran and the United States, but we believe that such talks should not be confined to the two countries, Iran and the United States. I think since it's all about Iraq, Iraq should also take part in these talks. So it will be not a bilateral, but a trilateral kind of, because I mean you can't. The idea of the United States and Iran discussing the future of Iraq is rather offensive to us. We have to be part of those discussions.
John Wallace.
Jonathan Wallace from the New America Foundation. I was wondering, what do you see as the role of international oil advisors in helping to build up the Iraqi oil infrastructure, both in the short term and then in the long term, perhaps after the creation of an Iraqi national oil company?
Yes, well, of course, the oil law is still pending. It's still before Parliament. It has not been approved or adopted yet, and there probably will be some amendments to it. But of course, it makes it possible for international oil companies to be involved very deeply and aggressively in developing the oil industry in Iraq.
You got a follow-up?
Mohammed Saleh from IPS again. You said that the U.S. should commit itself to defending Iraq against any foreign aggressions, but that has been a major source of concern here in Washington, and many people say that U.S. shouldn't go that far. What would you say to those people who say that U.S. shouldn't commit itself to defending Iraq?
Well, I think the United States has committed itself to defend the Gulf states, and it has committed itself to defend other countries too. So there is nothing unusual about that, and I think Iraq is an important country in the Middle East, and its defense is certainly in America's interest, because I mean, if Iraq is allowed to be dominated by other powers, then the whole balance of power in the area would be upset.
Let me ask a quick question. I was quite actively opposed to the invasion of Iraq when it was not popular to be in that position. But in April of 2003, I wrote a New York Times article and said, that debate is over. Now how do you visit the question of how do you get an occupation right? And most occupations don't go right. But one of the key characteristics of occupations that have succeeded is creating a class of political and economic winners that did that. And the way I suggested it was something like land reform in Japan, but an oil equivalent, and to create a sort of Alaska Permanent Fund-like model which we have in the state of Alaska, where oil lease revenue is held in public trust.
Yes.
Each year, half of the gains of the previous year are distributed as dividends to Alaskan state citizens. And I put this out there. It got a lot of attention, actually, in the U.S. Congress from Colin Powell. We had Sergio Vera de Mello, who was, until his unfortunate death, an advocate of something along those lines. And my understanding from a friend who was at New America Foundation and then went to work in the Coalition Provisional Authority, Noah Feldman, from his discussion with very Iraqi Governing Council members, was that about 3/4 of the Iraqi Governing Council members thought this was an interesting and important thing to think through. But an opponent to that idea, as I understand it, was Mr. Ahmed Chalabi. And I'm interested in that snapshot because I had a lot vested in it. Did Mr. Chalabi undo this? Did the U.S. government just not proceed at a good time? And do you think that that kind of mechanism might have created both a greater stakeholding of Iraqi citizens with their government and created more cohesion and might have created more less of a fear of competing elements? Or do you think that that was a silly contraption that might not have had any results?
Well, I have no idea or interest in what Ahmed Chalabi thinks. But anyway, you know, the oil law, which is, I said, pending in Parliament, deals with the distribution of revenue. And there will be a mechanism about distributing the revenue.
But not to individuals.
No, not individuals. No, I think that probably will have to wait for a while. It's, because you know Iraq needs a great deal of capital now to improve the infrastructure, to build schools, hospitals, roads, bridges, housing, and therefore, if you are going to distribute the money to the people, I don't think such buildings will be, such reforms will be made.
What is Chalabi's role now inside Iraq?
I haven't got the foggiest idea.
Interesting. Any other
Well,
questions?
I mean, he keeps on reinventing himself. So.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Sir, Nazar Janabi from the Washington Institute. You talked about building a security forces that is secular and independent. I've been trying to advocate the idea of the Iraqi army being shielded from whatever political interferences that is around in the Iraqi arena, and focusing on making this Iraqi army as a protector of Iraq's constitution and the protector and guarantor of Iraq's unity.
Have you written about this?
Excuse me?
Have you written about this?
It'll probably be published in a few days.
Okay. So go to the WINIP website, and I just want to direct the people watching to your work. It's interesting.
Thank you. So I wonder what would you think about this, and would it be possible to do this or not? Thank you.
I didn't understand exactly.
Building an Iraqi security forces,
Yes.
Basically an Iraqi army
Yeah.
that is shielded from the political influences and loyalties around the political spectrum. in
Yeah,
Iraq.
okay, sure.
And this army could work closely with the coalition for the foreseeable future, as long as the coalition is in Iraq. And then when it's time, and this army could maintain law and order in Iraq, this army would also be the guarantor and protector of Iraq's constitution and Iraq's unity.
And piggybacking, how do you feel about the disbandment
Well, I mean,
of the Iraqi army?
I agree with what you're saying, but being the guarantor of the, I think the guarantor should be really the elected representative of the people. Otherwise, we'll have the Turkish example. You mean?
Mm-hmm.
No, you know, the Turkish example.
And it's not really bad for the current situation in Iraq. I mean,
Yeah, but of course the problem is that you can never be sure what the generals will do.
Should the
I
army?
mean, look, the generals were overthrew several governments in Turkey, elected governments. They have done that. Well, if we then we go back to the because we have had experience of military coups, overthrowing government. If we are going to give the army this responsibility, because they can always say, the generals say, this government is violating the constitution, and therefore it should be overthrown. No, we have to look. We have to have a real democratic system, in which the representative of the people will make the decisions. You know, it's not. It won't be easy.
How did you feel about Jerry Bremer's work that he says was on behalf of the president to disband the military?
Well, I think that was wrong. That was wrong. That was wrong, and that and the de-Baathification, which led to the dismissal of thousands of qualified civil servants.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, Ian Tolan with the United Nations Information Center here in D.C. Minister Pachachi, to what extent or capacity do you see the United Nations and or its affiliated organizations as perhaps a future facilitator of security?
We certainly believe that the United Nations should have an important role in Iraq.
How does the average Iraqi view the United Nations?
Well, I think they approve of the United Nations. They want to internationalize the Iraqi issue. They don't want to sort of be left alone facing great powers like the United States. They'd like the United Nations to be part of the whole picture, you know, and help Iraqis in many ways, you know, in, both diplomatically, politically, as well as, of course, providing humanitarian aid and economic and expertise and so on. So, no, we'd like to continue working with the United Nations. I think it's a good thing for Iran.
We've put you to a lot of hard work this morning, and I'm very grateful for the time. You remind me, and you may not like this comparison, but I try to be blunt, of a friend of mine in Palestine, Mustafa Barghouti, who's also trying to sort of build forces of a liberal secularism, a balance, and get back to sort of merit-oriented thinking, if you will. Mustafa Barghouti will be in speaking for New America Foundation in June. Well, this is June, isn't it? So one of these days. And I'm interested in whether or not there are things that can be done externally, or whether it's better for us to stay out of it, to help strengthen across the Middle East region secular sort of liberal movements like yours in building capacity and working more effectively without at the same time undermining the legitimacy of what you're doing as being an organic reflection of political interests in those regions? Or is it better for America and Europe just to remain outside of that?
No, I think we would welcome any help and any assistance.
But what form that
well, this is something that can be agreed on. There are all kinds of things that you can do, and no, we are not xenophobic, or we are quite open to foreign relations and assistance and help.
Please join me in welcoming and thanking Adnan Pachachi. Thank you very much.